What if events went differently in The Amazing Spider-Man 2? What if Peter Parker had the Venom symbiote in The Amazing Spider-Man 2? What do you think would have happened to the original storyline? Well, in today's video, I'm continuing my Symbiote Saga series on what if Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker had the symbiote in the Amazing Spider-Man franchise. You might have seen the first part of that one, but if you haven't, please make sure to check it out, as it will help you follow the storyline. I can't say it enough, there's so many things within the first one. If you don't go back and watch that, you're gonna come to this one and you're gonna be very confused. So this one's more of a part 2 rather than another version of events. Peter killed Lizard and was confronted by Uncle Ben at the end of the storyline, where we are now led to Peter being jailed for his crimes with the Venom symbiote. Make sure to follow my Instagram for more updates if you want to see more of me, and I'll also be taking a lot of your requests and making them into reels, so if you follow me on Instagram, that's a perfect place to see a lot of those underrated requests being made. I would highly recommend you doing that. If we can gain another 50 to 100 followers from this video, that would be amazing. The links will be in the description down below. With that being said, my fellow watchers, let's dive in to the multiverse. Peter sat on his small prison bed, still contemplating all that had happened. He still couldn't believe that his life had come to this. He thought of how his life would have turned out if he hadn't had his powers in the first place. He blamed it on that stupid spider that bit him in the first place. Peter still had his spider powers and he could have used them to break out of jail easily. But he had convinced himself that being in prison was what he deserved. Uncle Ben and Aunt May had been coming to visit him regularly, so that it was no surprise when a prison warden told him he had a visitor. Peter got to the visiting areas, and from a distance he could spot Uncle Ben and Aunt May. On getting there, he acknowledged the fact that Aunt May had been losing a lot of weight. Each time she visited, she looked thinner than before. He knew it was probably because she had been thinking about him a lot. However, seeing their faces today, he didn't need his spider sense to know that something was definitely wrong. Peter asked Aunt May what was wrong, and she told him. Today was supposed to be his graduation. It made him even more sad to learn that today was supposed to be his graduation from high school. Peter closed his eyes and tried to picture himself in that graduation dress, and how he always planned on teasing Gwen on how silly her own graduation would make her look. It still grieved Peter when he thought about how it was his fault that Gwen didn't get a chance to graduate from high school. Peter spent some more time with Uncle Ben and Aunt May, and he told them how he had missed them. Specifically, how much prison food sucked, of course. Aunt May also told Peter about how quiet the house was without his presence, and how much she missed looking at his adorable face while he ate at the dinner table. As Aunt May was talking to Peter, Parker shared a few tears, and Aunt May told her something that broke everyone's heart. "I'm so sorry, Aunt May, for everything I have put you through. You deserve better." Uncle Ben got up and hugged him, telling him his life was not over, and that he still had a lot more good in him to give to the world. Almost immediately after Uncle Ben and Aunt May comforted Peter, the police officer walked right towards where they were sat, and Peter knew why he was coming. The officer noted that it was time for Parker's folks to leave, and Peter resigned to his fate. Peter got up and began walking back towards his cell. When he heard Uncle Ben call his name, Peter turned back, and Uncle Ben, now in the embrace of Aunt May, said to him, "Don't let one mistake define who you really are." Parker took one last look at Aunt May, and she was crying as usual. She cried each time she and Uncle Ben came to him. Sometimes Peter wished they stopped coming, that they stopped caring about him, and the thought hurt him badly. The next day, Peter jerked up from sleep. His prison uniform and his bed were all soaked up in sweat. The last words his uncle said to him earlier were troubling him, and he had been seeing Gwen more frequently in his sleep. He could still see the fear in her eyes, as her life flashed before her eyes when the lizard killed her. Peter wished she had not rushed to interfere at all. Peter lifted his pillow up and he took a blister pack containing the drugs which the prison healthcare had given him, because he was battling with post-traumatic symptom disorder ever since the night of his arrest and Gwen Stacy's death. Deep down, Peter knew the drugs were not very efficient, but he had chosen them, for some unknown reason, to keep taking them. Suddenly, Peter was informed that someone had come to see him. Peter was shocked. He wanted to ask the cops who it was, but he quickly decided to keep his mouth shut. Peter just stood up and followed the cops, while he pondered on who was visiting him. Who could it be? Peter saw that it was his best friend, Harry Osborn, and he immediately felt a bit uneasy. Peter knew at this point, Harry knew that he was Venom and Spider-Man, which made him feel guilty. Peter immediately corrected himself by acknowledging the fact that it was not just Harry, but everyone knew who he was, and that was the reason that he was always on surveillance. Deep down, Peter knew that the prison security was no match for him. If he wanted to escape, he could take out every security officer and run away, but his guilt was the only thing keeping him in check. Osborn smiled at Peter and wasted no time in complimenting Peter's uniform by telling him how much he looked good in them. Peter said nothing and kept a straight face. Harry told Peter that he had a disease called the retroviral hyperplasia and that he was dying. Peter was immediately stunned by the news he had just received. He could not lose Harry too. Harry saw the fear in Peter's eyes and quickly told Peter that there was a formula which his father, Norman Osborn, was working on before his death. The only thing that kept him from completing the formula was the blood of a person who survived being bitten by one of the radioactive spiders, and that was, of course, Spider-Man. Peter quickly got apprehensive as Harry begged Peter for some of his blood, so he could cure his disease and live. In return, Harry promised to help Peter break out of jail. Peter asked him how safe it was to make a formula from his own blood, but Harry assured him that it was the safest thing he knew right now. Peter, out of the care for his best friend, could not refuse his friend. He had already lost Gwen after all. Peter accepted the deal and Harry smirked at Parker, telling him that he always knew he could count on him. Harry hugged his best friend, noting how he owed Peter his life. Harry left Peter, who sat down in deep thoughts, as he hoped that he was making the right decision. Peter quickly laughed his worries off, as he knew Harry like the back of his hand, and he was not a bad guy. Peter lay down in his cell thinking about Harry's visit earlier, when a dark shadowy figure appeared in his cell. Peter could not see his face, but he knew his figure was well built. The figure quickly identified himself as one of Harry's business associates. Any other normal human would be very scary if a person had appeared in their cell. But Peter was not a normal human being. He was Spider-Man. Peter seemed very relaxed as he prepared for any attacks if the shadowy figure had any ideas. The figure told Peter that he and Harry Osborn had talked about Peter's release, and without wasting any time, he asked Peter for the blood. Peter took the knife the figure pointed towards him, and he sliced his finger for enough blood to come out. Peter gave him the blood and laid back down on his bed. The gentleman engaged Peter in a conversation, and in this conversation, he told Peter his parents truly were one of the best people he ever knew. This statement alerted Peter, and it made him quickly sit up and inquired more about his parents. The shadowy figure told Peter how his parents were always ready when called upon. He also told Parker the events of their deaths, how they were killed by the Red Skull. This made Peter very sad and angry. The shadowy figure then told Peter that he had a job for him, but this job required him to join a team, and in return, he could have his symbiote partner back. Peter bluntly refused, stating the fact that his powers were more of a curse than a blessing. Peter stated that he was just planning on living a normal life if he could, once he got out, stating that he was no hero and the world would be better off without him. The shadowy figure tried to convince Peter that this was a perfect way of redeeming himself for all of the mistakes he had made before. He told Peter that Gwen's death would be a waste if he couldn't help save the world. He spent a few more minutes trying all he could to convince Peter, telling him how a new villain called Electro was going to take down the city, and Peter was the only person who could possibly stop him. Of course, Peter was surprised that there was a new villain in town. How much did he miss while he was in prison? Anyways, prison internet sucked as well. Peter thought to himself that if Electro was going to destroy the city, then he would probably try to stop him. No one who wasn't strong enough could go against Electro. Peter accepted the deal, but promised himself that this time, he was going to make sure he handled his powers responsibly. Although Peter was not sure how he was going to do it, he decided that he would try. The words of Uncle Ben came back to him, and this time much stronger. Peter was not going to let the past determine who he was. He was going to save the world and change their perception of him. Max Dillon, Electro, sat on the top of a skyscraper. The only thing that caught his attention, despite the fact that it was not the brightest and biggest building, was the Oscorp facilities. Max Dillon was once an electrician at Oscorp, but one night, the head of the company had asked him to stay back and work later so he could fix up a broken cable at one of the labs. Then his story changed forever. Max had accidentally slipped on one of the ladders when fixing the broken cable, and he fell into a pool of genetically modified eels. When Max Dillon was found, he was kept at Oscorp to continue testing the effect of the eels on him. Oscorp, in an attempt to see if they could drain the electricity from his body, performed a procedure they knew could be fatal to Max's life, killing him in the process. Oscorp had quickly covered it up and reported his case to the police as a worker-related accident. The police had closed his case, and he was sent to be buried. The eels had made Max an energy magnet, and any electricity that came close to him would revive him. Max's body had sucked in electricity while it was being driven to the cemetery, and it revived him. Dillon had sworn to himself that he would exact his revenge on Oscorp. Harry Osborn was very good at science. Some could say he was almost as smart as his father, and it had always annoyed him as he wanted to be better than him. Harry had tried using Spider-Man's blood to make a formula for himself. He followed the best procedures as he should. Harry injected himself with the formula and he hoped to see changes in his health. But even after using the formula multiple times, rather than being cured, his conditions seemed to get worse. Harry Osborn at this point knew that there was nothing more he could do to save himself. And just like his father, he was going to die. The thought of dying really got to Harry. He felt it was unfair to die, but there was nothing more he could do to save himself. Harry headed home, disappointed and angry. Dying was not part of his plan at the moment. He soon embraced alcohol as he drank, while he was watching his multiple TV shows at his house. But TV shows did not seem appealing to him at the moment. Harry then decided to retire for the night. While Harry was going to his room, his gaze got fixed on the door to his father's room. He felt a little bit sad that he had not spent enough time with his father while he was alive. Suddenly, the urge to go inside that room was so strong, it felt like someone was whispering in his ears telling him to go inside. Harry obeyed the voice and opened the door as the stench of abandonment hit him. As Harry scanned through his father's room, he noticed a small amount of lights coming out of his father's closet. He quickly went ahead to see the source of the light. He was quite surprised by what he found behind his father's closet. There was a little door, and the light was coming from the door. Harry had not seen the door before, and he was so apprehensive about opening it, but he did it anyways. Harry tried to handle the door, but the door did not open, so he grabbed a hammer from the toolbox and tried smashing the door open. When the dust and debris cleared, what Harry discovered left him shocked. Harry stared at the images of Peter pinned on a board, pictures taken from when Peter was about 3 years old. He picked up some of the books on the small table beside him on the board. He discovered that his father was monitoring Parker. After going through a few books, Harry discovered that Peter was quite special, and that was probably why he survived the spider's bite. Jealousy immediately filled Harry's heart that his own father had neglected him, all because of his best friend, Peter Parker. Harry also discovered that the Venom formula, which his father had made from the radioactive spiders, but unfortunately Norman never got to use the formula. Harry knew that the Goblin formula was dangerous, but he felt betrayed by life because of his illness. There was nothing to lose. Harry decided he was going to take the formula as it could cure him of his illness. Harry smiled mischievously as he injected the Venom formula into his system. Almost immediately, the formula started to take effect on his body, and it was a very painful process for Harry Osborn. Harry could feel his life slipping away as the venom spread through his own body. Harry then remembered an emergency health suit, a prototype he had brought home to figure out its workings and possibly upgrade it, and he started to crawl towards it. By the time Harry reached the suit and donned it on, the Venom had already done irreparable damage to his brain, and he was no longer human. Harry was now the Green Goblin. Harry jumped on his glide and he took off with a cackle to wreak havoc within the city. Peter, on the other hand, had already broken out of jail. He was sitting on top of a building as he knew that the cops would be looking for him everywhere. Observing the city from the building tops, he quickly admitted to himself that he missed doing this. He quickly noted a few changes around his favorite part of the city. Peter had thought about going to get some food at a nearby drive-by restaurant, but he didn't want to be recognized by people, so he decided to stay up the building till the city was asleep before he left. And besides, he was still expecting his new friend. Moments later, the dark figure appeared behind Peter. Peter knew that he would have been startled by the way the figure appeared, but Peter's spider sense, or sixth sense, had always called it. It had already kicked in, and Peter knew he was coming. The dark figure walked towards Peter, and he let him know it was time to get his symbiote back. He placed his hands on Peter's shoulder, and the black goo that Peter quickly recognized came out of the shadows and hovered over Peter. Peter felt his stomach rumble. He couldn't deny the fact that he was afraid. As the symbiote entered Peter's body, Peter closed his eyes, and just like he was in a trance, Peter began to see the things that had happened the last time he had the symbiote. By the time he opened his eyes, the dark figure had already left. Harry Osborn, who at this point had become the Green Goblin, was already starting to cause chaos in the city by using his pumpkin bombs to blow up buildings. Captain Stacy had been receiving distress calls all evening, which were all related to the Green Goblin. Captain Stacy, knowing he had no chance to fight the Goblin, had contacted Electro and told him about the Goblin. Electro swiftly accepted to go after the Green Goblin as he wanted to get in the good books for the cops. Electro immediately went after Green Goblin and caught up with him. Electro wasted no time and attacked him, striking him with electricity. The strike did not seem to have much effect on the Green Goblin other than phase him. Electro and the Goblin had a fierce battle, but it seemed like Electro had the upper hand. Peter Parker, however, was observing the battle between Electro and Green Goblin. He had arrived earlier to witness it. Peter had noticed the Green Goblin was in fact his best friend, Harry Osborn. Peter's first instinct was to fight against Electro, and by this time the battle was becoming fierce between the Goblin and Electro. Peter Parker came from nowhere and fought alongside his best friend, Harry. Peter was consumed by the symbiote, but Electro used his powers to defeat him because electricity seemed to be one of Venom's weaknesses. Goblin suddenly capitalized on Electro's absolute focus on Venom and incapacitated him. Together, him and the re-energized Venom beat up Electro. Meanwhile, Captain Stacy, who had received the news of Peter's escape and saw that he was now Venom again, had gone to Uncle Ben. He knew only his uncle could make Peter see the truth, that the Goblin was the enemy, not Electro. After Peter and Harry had subdued Electro, Peter was trying to talk to Harry about what had happened and what he had done to himself. Harry immediately got angry at Peter, blaming him for his condition and everything that had happened to him. While Peter was trying to calm the Goblin, he shot a missile at Electro at the exact moment Uncle Ben had arrived at the scene of the fight. Seeing Peter, he ran to try and stop the fight, but he entered directly in the path of the missile, and he could not escape the impact of the missile. Peter suddenly rushed to Uncle Ben, who was lying helpless on the ground. Peter held his uncle in his arms, and he stared at his lifeless body. Peter was in raw pain, and he suddenly became overwhelmed by the Venom symbiote and became angry. The Venom symbiote showed him the absolute power that they could become. The one true symbiote host. Venom took the opportunity to persuade Peter into becoming more. The symbiote showed Peter everything, the past, the present, and possibly the future. Peter attacked the Goblin and beat him relentlessly. Peter gave the Goblin no space to catch his breath as he pounded him rapidly. With so much rage in Peter's heart, he actually forgot that Harry was his best friend. Peter took the Goblin's glider, using it as a weapon. He punched it through the Goblin's heart, murdering him in front of Captain Stacy. Peter rushed back to where Uncle Ben was lying. He transferred the symbiote from himself to Uncle Ben, and the symbiote began to heal Uncle Ben's injuries. After a few seconds, Uncle Ben woke up, and Peter took the symbiote back and hugged his uncle. Peter whispered to his uncle never to scare him like that ever again. He couldn't believe the powers of the symbiote. It had almost taken him over again. He couldn't believe that he remembered that he could use the symbiote to heal people. Uncle Ben smiled and hugged his nephew. By this time, Electro had gotten his strength back, and other SWAT officers who had arrived at the scene turned their attention to Peter. They all trained their airstrikes and snipers on Peter while calling out for him to surrender. Peter looked around and saw all the damage that had been done. Peter slowly dropped to his knees in front of Captain Stacy and Electro. He stretched out both of his hands, ready to be cuffed by the police. The SWAT team cuffs and puts Peter into a police car. Peter looks out the window and sees Uncle Ben, Captain Stacy, and Electro, all staring as the car drove past them. When Peter opened his eyes, he noticed that he was in Gwen's living room. And just as he looked towards the dining room, he saw Gwen holding a bottle of water. She walked towards where Peter had been sitting and handed him the water. She then told Peter to leave the past behind. Peter told her that it was his fault that she was dead, and he had also killed his best friend. Gwen let Peter know that he had no choice when it came to Harry, because he chose his own part. True, he killed someone, and that the pain would never go away, but he had to heal nevertheless. She then told Peter that she was not mad at him at all, because in the end, he did the right thing. They shared a hug, and suddenly, Peter Parker passed out. A few minutes later, Peter opened his eyes again and found himself lying on a small bed. He quickly got up and looked around for Gwen. He then realized that he had been dreaming. However, he was sure that he had made peace with Gwen and himself. Peter fell back on his bed like a bag of potatoes, the only words leaving his mouth as apologies for his late best friend. While Peter was still lying on his bed, he heard his cell door open. Two huge men who wore black suits and also accompanied with black sunglasses stood by the door. They asked Peter to come with them, which he did without hesitation. Peter was escorted into an office where he saw Captain Stacy sitting in front of the computer. Captain Stacy pointed to a chair and asked Peter to take a seat. Peter sat on the chair directly facing Captain Stacy. After a few seconds, Captain Stacy shoved the computer aside. He then asked Peter how he was feeling. Peter told him that he was doing okay. Then Captain Stacy stood up as he unshared Peter to a couch on the other side of the room. As Peter and Captain Stacy sat on the couch, Stacy asked Peter if he needed anything, and Peter respectfully declined. Captain Stacy then told Peter that he was being released from jail. Peter, sounding surprised, asked why they were going to let him go. As dangerous as he was, Captain Stacy told Peter that he was not a bad person. After all, he had saved the city from the Goblin. He also saved Uncle Ben, despite how risky it was. However, the captain told Peter that just because the DA considered him worthy of release, because he saved the city, didn't mean he had his eyes off of him. Peter had killed his best friend, and that meant he still had evil somewhere inside of him. Captain Stacy promised to have his eyes on Peter. If Peter made one more wrong move, Stacy would come for him. Things had gone back to almost being normal for Peter. The only thing he wasn't used to was Spider-Man. Peter thought that he would become Spider-Man and Venom once again. Peter visited Gwen and Harry's graves with flowers. He felt sad that his two best friends were no more. He had now learned that with great power comes great responsibility, but he learned it the hard way. One night, as he tried to sleep peacefully, he felt something. A sudden jolt from his bed. He stood up to his shock. He saw the dark figure from prison. The figure smiled and informed him that he had another mission for Peter. Then Peter knew something was definitely strange about this man. Before he could speak, he encountered a bright light. When he opened his eyes, he was standing in front of Spider-Man, a young boy of nothing more than 17. Peter looked at himself and realized he was in his suit. Looking at the boy, Peter knew immediately that this was another universe. He had learned a lot about that while in prison. The boy quickly took off his mask in shock. "Did Mr. Stark send you?" the boy asked. And that is going to be What if the Amazing Spider-Man 2 had the Venom symbiote? What if Peter Parker had the Venom symbiote in the Amazing Spider-Man 2? It's definitely an interesting Spider-Man fan fiction, and we're gonna end it off with a high note that we'll be connecting the Symbiote No Way Home. That's a completely different series. It's the No Way Home, the MCU Symbiote saga, so that will be very interesting to dive into that. I cannot believe how this story turned out. It was very different from the Amazing Spider-Man 2. Although these events would have played out if the Amazing Spider-Man 1, if Peter had the symbiote in that one, and then continuing it with the sequel, I really wanted to still showcase all of the events that had happened. And although I could have made a brand new timeline with Peter already being Spider-Man and then getting the symbiote in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, I think it was already better to continue what I already had planned in the first one, so I hope I didn't upset anybody for doing that. I think I didn't. I hope I didn't, but if I did, I apologize. I think this one was definitely the better direction to go into. And also, I think it was interesting turning Electro, because previously I did a what if on what if Electro was good in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, and I still wanted to keep that concept within the storyline, and I think it really worked. I think it really did. That being said, let me know your thoughts in the comments section. Also, I do want to say that make sure to follow the merch store. Merch is on sale right now for the month of March. You can get it on sale. All the promo codes are on all my socials, on Discord, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, everywhere. Also, I do want to say that the Symbiote MCU saga, those merchandise designs are exclusively for the month of March. And also, I am selling a ton of Spider-Man 4 to 10 merchandise, so it's very interesting. Those you can get right now. It's hoodies. They're also on sale. Anything really helps. Anything does help because I can put it back into the channel and really upgrade the content and post a lot more on different platforms. That being said, make sure to follow my Instagram if you want to see your fan fictions made. I'm going to be turning them into YouTube shorts as well as reels, but you're going to see a lot more reels coming on the Instagram. It's going to be exclusively on there. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video, my fellow watchers. Have an amazing day, and please stay safe out there. Peace out.